This is the Positive EQ Perspective, where you'll find a more positive outlook on life by developing your emotional intelligence. My name is Kirsty Gwynn. I'm a coaching psychologist and speaker, and I'm passionate about helping people to experience more calm, contentment, and joy every day. Welcome. Today we're talking about what to do if you can't face your feelings. So before I had learned the emotional intelligence skills that I know today, whenever I used to feel stuck or overwhelmed by my feelings, the way that I would deal with that was just to try and get away from those feelings. I just couldn't admit that I was struggling to myself, let alone to anyone else. In high school, someone close to me was in and out of hospital, and I remember that my mom tried to talk to me about how hard this must be for me, and I actually got angry with her. I just couldn't admit that I was struggling. And in 2014, when I was in a really anxious, stuck place, I just did whatever I could to avoid those feelings that just felt really, really huge. I kept myself constantly busy because I felt like whenever I was left alone with my thoughts, those feelings would just become really overwhelming. During that year, a friend in Australia saw photos of me on a trip that I'd taken. So it was about, I put the photos on Facebook about 2 weeks after the trip, and she messaged me on Facebook. This was a friend that was, miles and miles away. And she said, "Can I say you look beautiful but sad?" And she was kind of asking me if I was okay. And I just remember that I brushed her off and I said, "I'm just tired," or something like that. And she didn't reply to that message. And I'm pretty sure it was because she knew that there was more to the story, right? But back then, I was trying so hard to pretend to myself I was okay. And I certainly like to pretend that, other people couldn't see that I actually wasn't okay. The truth was, I just couldn't face my feelings. I couldn't admit how I felt to myself, let alone to anybody else. And the thing is, as long as, back then, as long as I knew what to do about a feeling, I could deal with it, right? So if there was a specific problem and I knew like this is how I can solve it, then I would face that and deal with it. I could be proactive about it. But if I was ever feeling really stuck to the point that I thought, maybe I don't know why I even feel the way that I feel. Maybe I don't know what I feel. I have no idea how to solve this problem. If I even know what the problem is, then it just kept me paralyzed and I just completely stuck my head in the sand. Maybe it's the same for you. Maybe you find yourself keeping really busy to avoid your feelings or just pretending to yourself and to others that, everything is okay when deep down there's this niggling sense of the fact that you know that it's just not. And this can feel like a really paralyzing place, and it can really get in the way of us, feeling like we're moving forward. It gets in the way of our motivation, our ability to enjoy and connect with life. And that's why today I want to talk about what to do if you feel that you can't face your feelings, because these steps that I'm going to share with you are so key for me in finding my way back to myself, in resolving those feelings and finding more clarity and more joy and just more presence in general. So what to do if you can't face your feelings? The first step is to admit how you feel. Now, I know that you might think, what? I'm not going to do that. Back then, I hear you on that. Back then I had this idea that if I admitted to myself how I felt, I thought those feelings were so big that, if I admitted them, if I just faced them for even a brief moment, the feeling would surely completely swallow me up. I felt like I was just keeping it together, and if I were to face my feelings, I would definitely drown. But now, I understand that ignoring my feelings was actually making everything worse. You see, when you have a negative emotion, that's really your brain trying to send you a message. And when you try and silence that message, what happens is that part of the brain that you've probably heard me mention before, I like to call it the protective system, the part of the brain that is trying to keep you safe, that creates negative emotion as a a signal to kind of share some sort of message with you, it really feels like it's my job to send these messages. And when you try and silence that emotion or that message, that part of the brain kind of panics that you aren't hearing it. And so it turns the volume up. And it means that the more that you avoid your feelings, the bigger they're going to become until you're literally forced to pay attention. Right? Almost like the feelings will kind of just get bigger and bigger. Is that part of the brain saying, I'm going to make you face this. What we see actually is an escalation in the feelings rather than, what we're probably hoping will happen when we avoid the feelings. Certainly what I was hoping would happen was that they would eventually just go away. But really, they do need to be faced in order to move forward. So not facing my feelings was really what was keeping me stuck. And your brain, it just wants you to acknowledge how you feel, even if you don't know what to do about it. Right? So there are actually numerous studies that show that just acknowledging how you're feeling causes brain activity in areas associated with negative emotion, that protective system, to go down. Right? So we literally see a reduction in brain activity after doing something like just naming the emotion, saying, I feel anxious, I feel overwhelmed, I feel really stuck and I'm not sure why. Something feels off and I'm not sure how I feel, right? All of this, it makes a difference. Just admitting that, giving the emotion a name, we see in neuroscience studies that actually helps that brain system to calm down. So often we think, well, I can't face it until I know how to resolve it, right? Maybe we think I only have the courage to face that feeling, en route to a solution. But we don't realize that perhaps we don't realize that part of the solution is in admitting that we're not okay. That part of the brain doesn't need you to solve the problem as much as it needs you to just acknowledge the problem. And when you just admit that you're not okay, the brain's protective system can relax, just knowing, okay, I've delivered my message, right? My job is done. So I'm going to share with you perhaps a little funny, strange metaphor that I like to think about here. And it comes from one of my absolute favorite animated movies called Finding Nemo. And if you're a Finding Nemo fan, hopefully you remember the scene that I'm going to talk about. And I'm sure that you love the movie too. And if you haven't seen it, please go and watch it immediately. It's absolutely brilliant and really, really funny and just heartwarming. In this movie, there is a scene between two fish, Marlin and Dory. And as you'll know if you've watched the film, Dory suffers from short-term memory loss. Now Marlin and Dory are swimming together when Dory stops to ask for directions. And a school of fish tell her that you're going to come to a trench. And the trench, a really scary looking trench. And they say, swim through the trench, not over it. And Dory tries to keep this in her memory. She's repeating it over and over again. And she swims up to Marlin, who has arrived at this very scary trench and didn't hear the message himself. And of course, Dory's trying really hard to remember. But when she sees the trench, she gets such a fright, she completely forgets that, whatever she's just been told. And she looks at this trench and she says to Marlin, but I have a feeling we should go through the trench, not over it. And Marlin says, are you crazy? This looks like such a scary trench. We're not going through it. We're going over it. So Dory says, okay. And they go over the trench. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, but as they're swimming over this trench, they end up in a school of jellyfish. And it's really dangerous and they could get stung. And it's probably a lot more stressful than if they had just gone through the trench. And sometimes I think that this is a strange metaphor for our feelings, where we look at that dark, scary trench of emotion and we think, I'm just going to try and go around that, right? I don't want to go into it. It looks terrifying. I don't want to feel that. I'm going to go over the trench rather than through it. And we don't realize that, in fact, we're going to end up with so much more pain by trying to avoid going into those feelings. And yes, it feels vulnerable to swim through the trench of your feelings, but you'll feel better in doing so, right? You'll come out the other side. So there is that vulnerability of kind of going into that darkness maybe for a moment. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't feel like this feeling is comfortable. It doesn't feel easy to admit it. But on the other side of that is relief. I'm always fascinated by how big something feels in my head. And once I say it aloud, I just feel this sense of relief, right? And whether you choose to share your feelings with someone else or just begin by first admitting them to yourself, know that being honest with yourself will actually help you to ease those feelings rather than making them bigger. I remember how strong that belief was for me, and it was just so life-changing to realize that by facing it, I wasn't going to make it worse. It was actually going to be helpful. The second thing is to get curious about what your feelings are trying to tell you. So your feelings have something to tell you. Negative emotions are not just a painful part of life that you have to endure, but rather they can be a source of wisdom. In fact, often your feelings have something to share with you about what is important to you or what you want your life to be, and that's really valuable information. But when you don't face your feelings, you risk missing out on all of this wonderful wisdom. In fact, it's impossible when we're avoiding our feelings to actually learn from them, right, and allow that to move us forward. It's only when you find the courage to get curious about what your feelings might be trying to tell you that you can use them to your advantage. Right? They can help you get clearer on who you are. They can help you get clearer on what you want for your life. So sometimes my feelings are trying to tell me that I need to take better care of myself. Right? Maybe I'm burnout, I'm depleted, I'm exhausted. Maybe I'm on a path that doesn't feel right for me. Right? Even if I haven't figured out what is right for me, it's a start to admit that something doesn't feel right, and that often opens up space to work out what is. Or maybe they'll tell me I'm being treated unfairly and I need to stand up for myself. And let go of that resentment by being able to draw a clear boundary and improve that relationship. If I think back to 2014, that year that I felt so anxious and stuck, I can't help but wonder what I would have discovered had I paused to hear the wisdom of my emotions rather than dismissing them. And maybe they would have told me that I'd been through one perpetual disappointment after another that year, that adjusting to life with a back injury was really hard, and maybe I would have realized that I should be kinder to myself. Maybe I would have cut myself some slack, and in the space that all that pressure that I was putting on myself had left behind when I released it, I might have also had more space to hear myself and kind of work out what I really wanted. But I didn't know this back then. Right? These days, I'm much more open to what my feelings might be trying to tell me, because I know that I find more clarity by moving towards them and being curious about them, rather than moving away from them and trying to avoid them or shut them down. I think this is really the essence of self-trust, to be honest. And trusting that, you feel the way that you do for a reason. The reason isn't always as obvious as we maybe think, but getting curious about how you feel and what those feelings might be trying to tell you is the first step to finding the answers that you need. Finally, one of the other things that makes it really difficult to face our feelings is if we don't, feel capable of coping with those feelings. And so it's really essential that, as the third point, you equip yourself with reliable coping mechanisms that you feel work for you personally. So that's exactly what was happening for me back in 2014 and all the years before. I didn't know what to do to cope with my feelings, and so I dealt with them in the best and only way I knew how, right? Which was to stick my head in the sand or to keep them to myself, to deny them. But now that I've learned the emotional intelligence skills that I have today, I have a new sort of confidence that even if I don't know how to resolve the situation, there are things that I can do to manage the feeling, right? So I feel like I have more control and I'm more empowered I feel like I have more choice, essentially, that even if the situation or the problem is not resolvable, it doesn't mean that I have to keep feeling that way. And knowing that I have practical things that I can do to manage my feelings gives me the confidence, in a sense, to face that feeling as well. So it's therefore also essential that I really recommend that you experiment with different coping techniques to figure out what it is that helps you to cope. And this might be different for all of us. So is it exercise, mindfulness, deep breathing, journaling, talking things through with someone that you trust, right? Experimenting with different things and what you find effective in coping mechanisms that you feel are serving you, right? Rather than hindering you or holding you back. And when you have these, it's like you've created a safe place to land, right? And that's kind of that safety net is just a wonderful foundation for, from which to have the courage to face your feelings. In my flagship program, The Positive EQ Perspective, I actually teach a variety of helpful coping strategies that psychological research has found to be effective for most people. And you can use these coping strategies whenever your emotions feel too intense or overwhelming, and you'll kind of have the chance to practice different ones that might feel right for you. So you can add yourself to the waitlist for this at www.positiveeq.com/waitlist. Well, that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Every subscriber counts, and it helps this information to reach more people. Thank you, and I'll see you next week on The Positive EQ Perspective. If you're looking to calm negative thoughts, accept yourself, and live joyfully, then you need my free roadmap to overcome negative thinking. You'll discover 7 steps to follow, as well as 3 mistakes most people make trying to improve their mindset and life that only make things worse. Visit positiveeq.com/free. That's positiveeq.com/free.